Now you worked for China Air Transport in the
Civil
early
air
days.
transport.
Sorry, Civil Air Transport. What was that like in the early days?
Oh, that was fun. In those days, I it was just fun. We got to travel to because, like I mentioned to you earlier, how difficult it was for Chinese to travel on a Chinese passport. That was one way I could go to all these places without having to worry about, um, getting visas and traveling. Plus, in those were in the early days where people didn't have that many tours. They didn't have that many travel agents with all these neat tours that people can go on now. They didn't have that. So for us, I mean, I was a young kid. That was a great way to see the world. So I really enjoyed that. It was fun.
Now, for you, uh, being in Hong Kong and doing business in China and seeing all the changes now, how far do you think China has come 50 years after 1949?
Well, I think for the first 30 some years, they had a pretty bad time. I always said instead of in the old days under the KMT, there was a lot of corruption, and there were a great deal of uh, there were a lot of poor people, very poor people, and there were some very wealthy people, and there were some middle class. But then when the communists took over, instead of raising everybody's level to a middle class and reduce the rich to a poorer status, they reduced everybody to a poverty level. So I didn't think that was such a great deal. So I'm glad that you know, I am not a believer in communism. It may be great in theory, but it doesn't really work. Um, and I'm glad they opened up.
What are your thoughts on RONGJI?
Oh, I think he's great. He's really fantastic. Because there are so few people who has the vision that he has, who is sharp enough to grasp all the nuances of a complicated economy that a great big huge country with an overpopulated population that China has, and also a poor base, and all the needs that China needs. So I think he's really one of the rare leaders that China has, and I hope he is given the privilege of changing China's economy for as long as he is willing to do so. And at the same time, having said that, I have to say that we have to accord President Jiang Zemin his dues for having the vision and the magnanimity that he has to allow RONGJI to do his job. Because without President Jiang Zemin, RONGJI wouldn't be where he is. And definitely, the two of them working as a team is good for China, and it's China's good fortune that they have these two leaders at this time. And I hope they stay on for a long time.
We were talking about history, and as we know, China's history didn't start in 1949. Most people say that China, there's never a time that China didn't know suffering. Do you think it's quite important to actually accept the past and be proud and still be proud of its history?
Yes, I think it's important for China to be proud of its history, accept everything that's happened to it, and not try to erase what was China's history. I find that when the Chinese officials try to erase what had happened before or pretend like it didn't happen, it just shows to me that it's a basic insecurity. If you are confident you're a great nation, which China is and was, even though it had all its problems, it's still a great country to be reckoned with, and it's a huge country with a huge population that nobody can hide under the rug. The Chinese people have to have confidence in their own history and their own country, not to try to distort what had happened, and accept what had happened, you know, because I lived in France for 2 years, and plus I've been to Europe many times, and I see how the Europeans are so great at public relations for their country and their history. That's what makes Europe so interesting for people to go and visit, because on every old building and every little staircase, on every doorway, there's a plaque of somebody lived here, or somebody composed a piece of music there, or somebody wrote this novel there, or somebody slept there. I mean, you know, it's filled with history in Europe, and yet their history is not nearly as long as China's history. And we have so much information that is wiped out because the Chinese, first of all, don't keep track of all these things. And every time there's a new regime, they wipe out the old. Well, I don't think it should be wiped out. It should be kept and documented, and also it would be of tremendous historical interest to people, as well as tourist attraction, if China would copy the Europeans by documenting and keeping the history of different old buildings, of different sites, of different, whether you agreed with, you know, whether it was Kuomintang or Qing Dynasty or Yuan Cao, doesn't matter. It's still history. And somehow the Chinese always use documentation as a propaganda rather than public relations. I think there's a difference.